Let's do this thing. Okay, so everybody go ahead and settle in. Let's go ahead and get some things pulled up. Perfect. We'll mute the tab. Uh and then yeah, we should be good to go. Perfect. Okay, so hey everybody, glad you guys could make it. Bears just lost 10 to 31 to the New York Jets, and it's not going to surprise you and or anybody that so normally as I do a post game pod, right? It's pretty standard, I guess you could say, that I go recruit around. I go see if there's anybody who's down to do a guest spot. And generally I pick from you get the idea. Just in running a podcast, nobody really wanted to talk about this game. I don't blame them, right? It was a game where nothing really good was going to come out of it outside of just more of the same. So I had this goofy idea yesterday where, for the sake of both entertainment and because I think that there's actually multiple ways that you could view a game like this and the situation that the Bears are currently in, I'm going to do a Skip Bayless versus Skip Bayless esque podcast. The legitimate attempt here is that we are going to start up. I'm going to play both the host and the guest. It should be a relatively short show, not something particularly long, right? But we can talk for a little bit about it afterwards. I just wanted to make it ostensibly clear that even though I am by myself, the whole Robert Schmitz is having Robert Schmitz on his podcast thing. That is the bit, but it's not just a solo show. It is going to be me interviewing myself and talking out of both sides of my mouth. So may work, may not. I certainly have a vision, I guess you could say, of potentially trying to turn this into a segment on the channel. Not this specifically, but like a Rob versus Rob kind of thing where going forward on different topics like, hey, the Claypool move, Rob versus Rob, where I talk about both sides and articulate both sides of an argument. Because, I mean, it's not uncommon, right? That within football, we can see both sides and then we could just serve it up to the comment section and you could go, and you guys could talk from there about which Rob I guess you could agree with. But that's a conversation for another day. Akusai, you know what? One of these days, that actually makes a lot of sense. Why not? But so within the context of this one, let me see if I turn that off. That should stabilize the light a little bit more. Guys, it's going to be a great one. We've got such a funny game to be going over here today. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm ready if you're ready. Do we have any questions before we kick off the actual podcast? I'm going to shoot out a quick tweet. Let's see here. Oh man, nothing funny at all. Truly. I mean, the injuries on the field were awful. Uh let's see here. Awesome. Let's get yeah, moment of silence for what we lost. I had to shoot out a tweet. Jay Sanders said, "Yes, 100%." Jay Sanders, I do agree with you. Ultimately, let's get rolling. What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Bear With Me, a Chicago Bears podcast hosted by yours truly, Robert Schmitz, right here on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. And today I have a treat for you guys, as even though the Bears lost 10 to 31 in New Jersey, I guess, to the New York Jets, we've got the one and only Bears analyst, Robert Schmitz, here with us to help break down this game. Robert, how you feeling? Robert, I'm doing okay. It's great to hear from you. Honestly, you said that we could do the show. I was excited. I've been following your content for an awfully long time, and I really can't wait to dig into this with you. Well, Robert, that's awesome to hear. And speaking of digging in, let's go ahead and dive in. What were your initial impressions from this one? Well, I mean, let's start at the top, Robert. This game was dominated going into it with a massive question of who was going to or even start this game, let alone the game that was going to happen on the field. The game before the game in the world of gamesmanship was nuts as we saw Justin Fields seemingly campaign the entire week to play. And then Trevor Siemian was going to start. At some point, Nathan Peterman was going to start because Trevor Siemian hurt his oblique in the middle of warmups. But then, no, no. Trevor Simeon's back to playing. Look, either this was some of the craziest gamesmanship I have ever seen in the NFL, or it was I don't know, some kind of embattlement within the organization. I mean, what did you take from this? Obviously, or honestly, Robert, I've sat here and wondered the same thing. I mean, part of me wants to know whether Justin Fields was truly just dying to play that much. And I can admire his competitive drive if that was the case. There's a chance this was just reported straight down the line. But obviously, in a world where John Fox was tight lipped about every injury report that they ever had, and Matt Nagy was tight lipped about every injury report that they ever had, you got to wonder whether there was a piece of this that came straight from the Bears organization and that Fields was never going to play, was always going to rest, maybe through the bye, maybe through the end of the season, but that they were giving him a chance to show that he was throwing on tape like we saw in Wednesday's practice so that the Jets could have to ultimately plan for both. I could see it both ways. Yeah, I know, Robert. Ultimately, I think I'm just trying to voice that I am disappointed that Fields couldn't play. Not because I wanted to see him play. I guess that's actually exactly it. I did want to see him play. I understand future ramifications, but for crying out loud, Robert, I mean, I I just feel like this team had a shot to win this game if Fields was playing. And the idea that Fields, I know it's a pain tolerance thing. I understand there's potential for re-injury, but we saw what this offense was outside of Justin Fields. I mean, for crying out loud, you have to wonder, what did they really think was going to be accomplished with Simeon? I understand, Robert. I can't help but think that the organization made a smart decision going forward with the way that they did. Look, the gamesmanship on the front end aside, I personally think that helping your franchise quarterback rest until the games, let's say, matter a little bit more in 2023 is probably the right call. I know it's semantic, Robert, but what was winning this game really going to do for this 2022 Bears team? What was it going to do? What are you talking about? I think winning culture really matters within this organization. I mean, they've won 3 games, Robert. They're 3-9. They're now at their 5th loss in a row for 3 years in a row. How on earth is a franchise going to pull themselves out of a funk like that if they don't win football games? I mean, I understand that Fields has some glittery numbers in the world of points he's putting on the board, the rushing stats that obviously helped contribute to an offensive style that got him run, may or may not have gotten him hit 20 times a game, which could have added up to the wear and tear. But how do you really look at a game like this and just you're comfortable losing? Robert, I understand. I think that that's a very normal way to think about this, frankly. But I can't help but point at this roster. Let's look at it, not just the way that it ended. Look at it before the game started. We weren't playing Justin Fields, sure, but we also weren't playing second round pick Kyler Gordon due to concussion. We weren't playing second round pick Jaquan Brisker due to concussion. Obviously, we traded away Roquan Smith. We traded away Robert Quinn. There are so many pieces to this defense and even to the offense with Tevin Jenkins. I think he played. Larry Borum obviously had to step in for Riley Reef. I mean, there are injuries all across this team, and I understand. You look at the Broncos, you look at the Chargers. The Bears aren't the only team that are hurt out there, but this team was not looking good before this game started, and it certainly didn't end up looking good afterwards with Eddie Jackson going down to what potentially may be a foot sprain if Mason West's connection from WCG, Hoots to WCG, is a good one. And we've still got yet to see what's going on with Darnell Mooney. But all the same, I don't know if they were going to beat this Jets team on the road before the game. I don't see why you would pin everything on Justin Fields. Yeah, Robert, I mean, I understand that. Like, I really do. I get it. The problem is you take a look at what's happening within this Bears offense. I mean, you saw the same game I did, right? Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, this Bears offense, sure, they could move the ball in the first 2 drives, but after that, the dynamism that Justin Fields brings to the table was clearly missed. I mean, it's as if the Jets saw, okay, Trevor Simeon is going to trust his checkdowns. He's going to trust his receivers out on the perimeter. Let's see if we can't get him hit and pull his eyes down. And guess what? It worked. I mean, say what you will, Robert, but that first sack, I was thinking it, Robert. Yep. That first sack was something that Justin Fields probably could have worked his way out of. And I understand that some of the checkdowns that Simeon hit early on in the game, and certainly that wild throw to Pringle that maybe should have been intercepted, weren't plays that Justin Fields was going to make right now. But Don't you think that by the end of the game, Fields would have ultimately been able to bring more to the table? Well, that's just it, Robert, isn't it? Like, on one hand, yes. But on another hand, we don't know because whatever it is, whether it's a separated shoulder, a dislocated shoulder, or a an AC joint sprain. I mean, obviously, the reporting on that specific injury has been kind of all over the place on what it is. We also know that it could have easily become a re-injury had he fallen on it wrong. And I don't think that's worth it. Sure. I think Fields maybe could have carried this offense to a 20-point performance, maybe even more than that based on the trending that they've been doing over the last couple of weeks, but who's to say it would have been worth it? I mean, you tell me, Robert, based on the way that this defense was playing, giving up 31 points to Mike White and 3 Bills, was it 4 touchdowns? Let's take a look at the box. Yes, it was 3 touchdowns to Mike White and sure, a talented, but maybe not that talented Jet secondary. Was a better performance from Justin Fields that made the loss that little bit closer really that important to you? Robert, I get it. I really do. I mean, I think that's what's got me so conflicted. I hate watching the Bears lose. I hate even more watching the Bears get blown out. I mean, this game after those first 2 drives was in the bucket. I mean, it was over. The Bears came back onto the field after that and they went 3-and-out their next 3 drives in a row while giving up, by the way, touchdowns on, let's see here, it looks like the Jets, after the Bears turned it over on downs, so the Bears scored their touchdown to make it 10-7. They turned them over on downs. They went 3-and-out. The Jets scored a touchdown. The Bears went 3-and-out again. The Jets scored a field goal. And from there, suddenly the offense looked eerily familiar, let's say. Oh, Robert, don't think I don't know. I agree with you. Going 3-and-out, 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 1 first down, 3-and-out again, 1 first down, 3-and-out again is not an offense that I want to remember. But let's think of it this way. We now know what the base plate for this offense looks like, right? Quarterback going through his progressions, still getting panicky in the pocket. Looks like Fields isn't the only one. And distributing the ball to checkdowns that make plays when the ball gets to them, don't when it doesn't. And I mean, some players, frankly, had their best performance. I thought Claypool looked solid today. Still had some things that he's got to work out. I'm mostly talking about the contested catch in the end zone where he was clearly held. Don't get me wrong. But had he turned back for the ball a little bit sooner and recognized the back shoulder, I do think that he would have had a better chance of drawing the call. Though, again, we're not demeriting him more than any particular play for not turning back to the ball soon enough because he made up for it with that go ball down the sidelines where he clearly beat Sauce Gardner and was able to fight through contact to catch the football. Also, Byron Pringle's catch of the end zone. I mean, what'd you think of that? Thought it was kind of nuts, didn't you? Like, that was a wild catch in the back of the end zone. And frankly, one that if I had to guess, the DB would want to have back because that ball did not look like it was thrown, let's say, particularly safely by Trevor Siemian. Could have been an interception, let alone a pass deflection. And Byron Pringle just went over the top and took the ball away. Yeah, I know. But outside of that, it's not like the Bears had a ton of highlights. And I can't help but think that the highlight or the low lights that they put on tape now, let's say, are worth it when they potentially, I mean, you've seen the Panthers score, right? The Panthers won today, beating the Broncos, and in so doing, bumped the Bears into what's currently projected to be the 2nd overall pick in the draft. I mean, what does that mean to you? Oh, draft schmaft. Come on, Robert. Like, all these nerds out there want to talk draft picks, and I get it. But like, don't the highest draft pick teams end up just picking at the top of the draft again? I mean, how much did the 1st overall draft pick last year, or 1st or 2nd, I can't particularly remember, help the Jaguars? How much has the 1st overall pick helped the Lions the few times they've had it, let alone the top 10 picks? Like, draft picks aren't everything, and I don't frankly understand why so many people are so willing to wish away wins in or just in the name of this potential for maybe a good player. It just seems so backwards, almost masochistic, like you're rooting for failure so that we can potentially see success instead of demanding success now. Don't get me wrong, Robert. I agree with you. But while you're citing some teams that have absolutely blown really good draft options, you got to take a look at teams like the Eagles, teams like the Dolphins, teams like, I mean, dare we say it, the Browns. There are plenty of teams, the Bengals, that have used those top picks and suddenly become the class of the NFL. And on the other hand, we take a look at the Rams, who've gotten rid of almost all of their draft picks. And while they totally won a Super Bowl and nobody's taking that away from them, this year, not so much. And they may ultimately be the reason that the Lions get another high draft pick. It won't be because it's the Lions pick, it's because it's the Rams. And so I hear you. But you got to remember, if it like you've seen the same college highlights I have, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are names that are absolutely everywhere, regardless of Ohio State's defeat to Michigan. So, with the second pick in the draft, you got to think that the Bears would have a particularly juicy trade down option should they take it. I mean, it's even if they move back from say 2 to 5 versus 2 to 12, the haul that they could get is quite large. I mean, look, I don't mean to belabor the point, but you saw what it cost for the Bears to move up from 3 to 2 just a couple of years ago. If the Bears if the Bears were able to drop down and get an offer like that, you could be looking at not only a Jalen Carter, not only, I mean, worst case scenario, you're talking about like a Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. That's an edge rusher for those who don't know, and he looks really fabulous. But you'd also potentially get another second round pick, potentially another first round pick on top of that, potentially another third, fourth, fifth, sixth round pick to make it three potential picks for the price of really nothing. And suddenly you're looking at a team that Justin Fields has this same team, Robert. This same team is one that Justin Fields has elevated to 30 points per game. 30 points, 29 points against Dallas, 31 points, if memory serves, against New England. That's probably wrong, but close enough. 30 plus points against New England, 30 plus points against Miami, 28 points against whoever we just played. Well, 24 points against the Falcons. Like, points on points on points. I understand all the conversation regarding yardage and passing yardage totals. Everybody loves to focus on these passing yardage totals from Justin Fields. Well, if you look at Trevor Siemian, is 179 yards with 2 sacks and a pick and a touchdown so inspiring to everybody? Because 14 for 25 for 179, 7.2 yards per pass, one touchdown, one interception, and 2 sacks for 14 yards is an awfully fieldsy passing total, don't you think? I hadn't thought about it that way, Robert. Yeah, I know. This sounds so silly because why on earth would it work out so easily for us? But this is the kind of game that makes you beg the question on style or not. Maybe Fields' passing totals have truly been the reflection of the offense that I know some people have suggested they are, and that yes, we can breathe easier knowing that Fields is adding this rushing piece to his offense because the passing game right now, that's offensive line plus wide receivers, can't sustain any better than that. Like, I completely understand anybody out there that says that Simeon's first two drives looked really good, but it's worth remembering that Simeon's first two drives were primarily taking a look downfield, quickly checking it down, Darrington Evans making a play, quickly getting the ball into the flat, David Montgomery making a play, and then Byron Pringle coming up later, huge on a big catch in the end zone alongside Chase Claypool grabbing a ball down the sidelines. Outside of that, the passing game pretty much looked like the passing game that it has, regardless of which quarterback was in it. It's like taking two routes to get to the same place, right? Because especially near the end of the game, it certainly looked much easier to shut down Trevor Simeon's passing attack than it did look to shut down Justin Fields's, let's call it, offense, because to call it Justin Fields' passing attack doesn't feel fair. I can't help but think that Justin Fields' ability to create plays was sorely missed today. While I understand that you wanted to see him play, I mean, even through the injury, and that's not something you disagree with, it does make me wonder what the offense would look like, whether Simeon or Fields was at quarterback, if the rest of the team around them was better. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Look, I get it. I know I'm a little on the disappointed side, but at the same time, I mean, it's not like Simeon, though he looked smooth and though it looked like we really might have something on our hands for that first two drives, the Jets threw a little bit of pressure at us and just got Simeon to drop his eyes. I mean, that first sack looked like it changed everything for the Bears offense. Suddenly, Simeon was just that little bit more skittish in the pocket. Suddenly, Simeon wasn't quite going through his progressions. Suddenly, Simeon's checkdowns were off, and who knows, maybe it was the rain. Like it could certainly be the rain, but you look at what was going on the other side of the ball, and I mean, for crying out loud, Robert, did you see how open Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, and the rest of these Jets receivers were? I mean, yeah, hard to miss him, right? Yes, Eddie Jackson fell down on that break where he could have made a tackle on what ended up being a Garrett Wilson touchdown. But Wilson, Corey Davis, and the rest of this Jets unit were open all over the place and making plays in the process. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. If you got Fields, a group like this, and that group isn't even like top 5 in the NFL right now from a production standpoint. Maybe they would have been had Mike White been the quarterback. Let's not go there. But it begs the question on how much of this. I mean, we've now seen what it looks like for Trevor Siemian to play in this Bears offense. How much of all of what we're talking about with Justin Fields passing woes do you really think is attributable to a supporting cast issue? And how much of it do you really think is a quarterback issue? I mean, it's hard to say. I wish that I could put my finger on it, but even me, as high on Justin Fields, frustrated that he didn't play, as I am, that it's yeah, no, you may have a point. I look, I'm by no means trying to put you in a corner. I get it, Robert, but I can't help thinking that while Trevor Simeon, again, like I want to acknowledge what you're saying, that Simeon had two drives that looked pretty solid, but the rest of the game was so like you can't get shut out like that. And I can't help but look at that and think to myself that that's a dynamism issue, right? Like a lack of dynamicness. And so when in that third drive, that fourth drive, that fifth drive, that sixth drive, that seventh drive, that eighth drive, you continue to get put into positions where you need to drop back and pass because it's the only option that isn't just turning around and handing the ball to a running back. I mean, the gourmet runs that we've seen, they weren't there today. The stretch runs, the things that play off the quarterback, the things that make you defend 11 on 11 in the running game, when those weren't there, we had a check down to Cole Kmet coming off of like a tight end angle route. We had a check down to David Montgomery, who would go pick up 8 yards out of 12. We had relatively uninspiring play from the outside. And again, maybe there was some rain to blame there. But when the other guy across from you throws for an easy looking 314 yards off of 28 passes, it's hard for me to excuse one when the other tore him up so well. Yeah, but I mean, look, you talked about this before, Robert. It's worth bringing up the difference in defensive quality. I mean, the Jets are a very good defense. Sauce Gardner, rookie or not, is a very good corner. While the Bears right here are starting, especially after Eddie Jackson went down relatively early, they're starting DeAndre Houston Carson as debatably their best safety. Their best pass rusher right now is Justin Jones, not very good at all, or at least not great as your best defensive lineman. Right. He looks like a solid rotational piece, but maybe nothing more. Kindle Vildor and Jalen Johnson both had relatively solid days, but with no real help in the defensive backfield outside of that, not at nickel corner, not at outside or not at safety. You're going to get torn up. And I mean, this Jets team is fast enough to put Jack Sanborn in places where while the young UDFA did make plays, these are not the same defenses. I mean, yeah, you're totally right. I get that. But at the same time, I don't know. I think that you could tell that the Bears, just like teams we've seen in the past, this looked like, to use an example, this looked like Nick Foles playing the Rams in 2020. This looked like Andy Dalton playing the Rams, unfortunately, have to use the same team twice in 2021. This looked like a team with a quarterback that could get the ball out because that's what he does, playing against a defense that had the guys to shut them out at pretty much every position on the field. And so we'll just have to wait and see. Like we'll just have to wait and see what things look like as the offense gets a little bit of investment, as the defense gets a little bit of investment. But overall, when you look at this game, what did you really think, Robert? I mean, look, when I think from an overall perspective, I think most of what I think is that we didn't need to play this game. Like, I get it. I understand this is what you do. You play 17 games in the NFL now. But and I understand also that the Bears look like they are right about to desperately need that bye week against or after the Packers game, because goodness gracious, just about everybody on this team got hurt. But overall, I feel like this game was more of the same. It was kind of a bummer to watch. I mean, we had a fun run up to 10-7, but after that, it was just a matter of watching a Bears team that I have seen for so long play another game looking exactly like they have. And honestly, Robert, I miss watching the last couple weeks games because this offense didn't bring anything to the table while the defense gets shredded. And I felt like I was watching a Tressman game again. Whoa, whoa, whoa there, Robert. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. What do you mean? I feel like to call it a Tressman era implies that this team was competing at the or was pushing resources forward like the Tressman teams were pushing forward. I mean, this is a tank year. What do you mean? The Bears, you got to remember, they're spending the second least on offense in the NFL. They're spending the second least on defense in the NFL. Do you know, Robert, the Bears have more dead cap on their defense, like committed to defensive players that are on other teams, than they do defensive salary this year? Whoa, really? Yeah, really, as soon as they traded Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn, dead money was so clearly tilted towards this is not our year that I can't help but read it any other way as, look, I don't want to say intentional losing, but certainly not quite as accountable a team as we might want. And without talent, I don't really want to rip Alan Williams apart either. I'm surprised you haven't brought that up. I mean, look, I get it, Robert. I would rip Alan Williams up, but it's not hard to see that it's not that the Bears lack talent up front and in the defensive back room. I want to see Alan Williams with a better core of defensive players before I make one judgment about him or another. If anything, the fact that he's got a UDFA and Jack Sanborn playing serviceable football is pretty surprising because I mean the Bears haven't had a UDFA make a real contribution since what, Bryce Callahan? Yep, Bryce Callahan was who came to my mind too. But all that to say, Robert, that I can't help but think that the worst part about this game was the injuries. Obviously, it's never fun to see a 29-year-old in Eddie Jackson, who's playing some of his best football, go down hurt. It's hard to see Darnell Mooney, a core piece of the future, get hurt. It's hard to see Justin Fields have to sit a game out for injury because, say what you will, had he toughened through it, it would have probably certainly would have felt to me emotionally like maybe the injury wasn't as bad as reported. But here we are. The main thing that I look at, Robert, is the Bears have roughly $140 million of cap space projected into next year. And I understand the cap space doesn't win you games, but this means that we can point and we can just assume, right? Because like somebody pointed out, by the way, it wasn't just that group. Riley Reef got hurt. Kyler Gordon is out. Obviously, that's not great. Neither is Brisker. Larry Borum got hurt. Michael Schofield had to come back into the game. Like this was a real rough one from a health perspective for the Bears. But when people say this group of starters isn't going to be the group of starters that carries the Bears forward in 2023, that massive amount of cap space, these high draft picks, that's what they're pointing to. Like Baltimore Ravens second round pick or not, because that Chase Claypool trade is looking a little expensive, though obviously he's got plenty of time to prove something. I thought he had a really nice step forward today in terms of just showing us some eye candy that we can hang on for the future. The Bears should be able to afford more than likely, what do you think, Robert? Like 3 top tier free agents, 4 solid tier free agents, and then 3 more role players at least with the money that they have. And they have to spend. Like, this isn't a question of value. This isn't a question of bargain shopping. They have to spend to hit the league's cap floor minimum, which is a year over year average, that they're spending so little that they got to push that money up or else they're going to get fined. Like it's a league requirement that they have to spend that money. They're going to be active in this free agency market. And so I can't help but look at this Bears team and just think to myself, what is going to happen when this team gets any better? I mean, they're already making some stops. It's not many, I understand that, but their run defense has been better than I thought it would be. So what does it look like when you add a run talent that can play against it like a Deron Payne? What happens when you add a Will Anderson to the edge? How much better does the pass rush get? If the pass rush gets better, how much better does the defensive back coverage get with guys like Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker then in their second year? I can't help but look at this Bears team, and while I understand that there are so many out there that just like you, that nothing wrong with it, that think that with Ryan Poles having brought in so many players and all of those players not looking very good. I'm looking at you, Byron Pringle. I'm looking at you. I mean, Justin Jones, not a bad example. Larry Ogunjobi, hard to tell whether he would have made the difference, so to speak. Nick Morrow doesn't look particularly special, but I'll point to what all of those players cost and remind you of just how little the Bears really invested. What does a 1-year deal for $5 million in 2022 really say about a GM's confidence in a player to be the difference? Because I don't think that says much about Byron Pringle. I don't think that says much about Dante Pettis that he was brought in for an even cheaper deal. I think he was at vet minimum. I think I don't think it says much about Justin Jones that he was brought in for a $6 million year-over-year average in a day and age where defensive tackles get paid $20 million, especially when they're good. They get paid more than that. I don't think it says anything about investment when the Bears signed Al-Qadim Muhammad for certainly less than $5 million, though his salary doesn't come off the top of my head. And sure, they're starting him, but he was always intended to be a rotational piece. And Colts message boards will tell you that he's frankly an Eberflus. I don't know, like Eberflus just seems to be really fond of the guy. We'll leave it at that. But I can't help but look at this and not see underperformers. I see guys that were never supposed to perform, guys that maybe we hyped up too much in the offseason. Look, I was there too, right? And if there's a value signing to be had, I think Equinemius St. Brown has looked better than I anticipated he would, even if that doesn't mean he's looked outright good, right? Dante Pettis has looked like he's worth rostering, despite I know that some Bears fans' frustration with him, over somebody like Byron Pringle, who has just lacked any luster whatsoever during the time that he's played as a Bear. And so as I look at this Bears team moving forward, I can't envision really holding Ryan Poles' name too close to this roster, because this roster to me looks like it was built to lose. And so with them being built to lose, I can't help but think that Ryan Poles' project roster is doing what it was intended to do. I mean, say what we will. If you're high on Justin Fields right now, you can raise your hand and you can confidently say that somehow this roster, with this ragtag group of offensive linemen, with this ragtag group of receivers, with this ragtag group of rookie defensive backs, Eddie Jackson, and then a bunch of guys like young edge rushers playing for a rotational role in the future, rotational defensive linemen playing for a role in the future, that the Bears have managed, injury or not, to develop Justin Fields a little bit, or certainly more than last year, while still losing a ton of games and potentially grabbing the number 2 overall pick. If you thought that this Bears team was competing for a wild card spot, I don't blame you for thinking that this roster is an abject failure. If you thought they were tanking, which I know I did, it's not a failure. I mean, well, that's the complicated part, right? If they were tanking, is it a success? Because I think it is. I know it's weird to think about, but losing so many games so competitively is with a roster that we want to replace consistently. It kind of makes you look like the I don't know, the GM, that his plan, so to speak, is coming together. I mean, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens. But I don't want to be a voice that looks at the Bears getting blown out by the Jets and acts like they've been getting blown out all season. They haven't been getting blown out all season. They've been competing with everybody in the NFL for 57 to 58 minutes over the last 5 weeks of the year when their QB1 was in the game. And this week he was hurt and a backup came in and looked like a backup and frankly showed just how poor the talent disparity is on both sides of the ball. And so within that, I can't help but still be excited about the Bears' future. It's just going to take it's just going to take holding your breath and getting through the next 6 more weeks. You know what I'm saying? Look, Robert, you said a lot. You could talk an awful lot. So you didn't exactly let me get a word in. But as much as it pains me to say it, because I cheer for the laundry. Look, we're all living a week at a time. Who isn't? And I hate watching the Bears lose. I hate watching this offense look this bad. I can't help but disagree. Look, the Cowboys defense was a lot better than this. The Washington defense was a lot better than this. And while the Bears still managed 400 yards again, I guess, even against Washington, the Bears were moving the ball up and down the field more, despite what the scoreboard says. Against New England, a very good defense, the Bears moved the ball up and down the field all over the place. Against Dallas, the Bears moved the ball up and down the field all over the place. Against Miami, who's not a great defense, they still managed to do it again. Against the Lions, they managed to do it again. And say what you will about Dean Pease' Falcons defense coming in and stopping them a little bit, it gummed them up to the point of them only scoring 24, which is awfully good for a bad day. I mean, shoot, the Bears would have very readily taken 24 points today. You know what I'm saying? I do. And so I can't help but look at Justin Fields right now. And I'm excited about him. While I disagree with Poles' strategy, I I guess I get it. I don't know. Tanking's not my thing, man. I look, hey, that much I can understand. There are not that many people that are down to tank, so to speak. Yeah, it's not my thing. I hate cheering for losses. I hate looking forward to losses. I hate looking at roster rebuilding projects, especially when it feels like with all these close games. I mean, for crying out loud, Robert, this Bears team is like two Valus Jones punt catches. It's Darnell Mooney catching a touchdown pass or Dante Pettis, one of those two against Washington. It's it's I don't know, ISM catching that fumble or like not fumbling, getting out of bounds. It's Justin Fields catching a break on Cole Kmet's knee knocking play against Miami. It's Justin Fields also managing to find. I know there was another one that went wrong on the first play of last week against Detroit. Like it's stuff that keeps going wrong that keeps costing the Bears wins. I mean, this team just doesn't feel 3-9. No, I agree with you. Like, right, I really do agree with you. Yeah, and if anything, I can't help but think that that exact sentiment is why the tank might be working. Because if this team feels better than 3-9, then the picks that they can get and the players that they can add from a position of nominally looking 3-9 puts them in the driver's seat for a potential rebound forward. I mean, you think about it like the Bengals. They slingshotted off of a rough year where Burrow got hurt, that they then immediately added Jamar Chase and went to the Super Bowl. I understand you look at the Bengals now, they're not exactly the Super Bowl team, but if those are the bounds and if this is their middle point, then I think we as Bears fans would take it over where we are now. And so I can't help thinking that the Bears are going to be better in the future. It's just a matter of honestly getting to the end of the season. I mean, amen to that, Robert. Like, especially with what happened on that rainy turf today, like, get me out of here. I am not looking forward to the Packers game next week. Well, you say that, but with reports now coming out about some weird Packers potential injury with Aaron Rodgers, who's to say how that game's even going to work out? But that'll be a conversation that we'll have to have some other time. Within this specific game, I'll close up by saying that I can't help thinking that this Bears game was a game that nobody really wanted to watch. I mean, obviously, right? But Trevor Siemian didn't exactly help. The Bears defense didn't exactly help. Giving up what felt like free yardage through the air to just about anybody who felt like catching a pass is never fun to watch. Reminded me of those horrible Mel Tucker years. And then when the Bears had the ball, they went right back to looking like your standard snap to throw to incompletion, snap to hold the ball, to throw the ball to incompletion, contested catches, having to dominate just about every simple and deep throw. Cole Kmet fumbled, which is not to dunk on Cole Kmet. It's more to point out that when the margins really get that tight, you start to remember literally everything. And then right there at the end of the game, despite driving, despite making some aggressive fourth down decisions that I can tip my hat to Eberflus for, yeah, I mean, they threw an interception and iced the game. Like, I get it. Not a very or like not a very visually appealing game by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think that this exact kind of game is something that in 2024, we literally won't think about at all. I mean, this isn't the offense that I think the Bears want to run. It was neat to see what the quick passing game looked like. It was also nice to know the obvious that a little bit of quick passing wasn't going to completely fix the offense. I thought David Montgomery had a really solid game today, both through the air and on the ground. I thought Darrington Evans looked really solid, made you wonder why 25 was getting the carries that he was. But overall, this offensive line still looked like an offensive line that needs work. Larry Borum, before he was hurt, allowed a sack off of a free edge rusher that I still don't really understand, and I'll need the all 22 to see. I thought Trevor Simeon had a perfectly fine game, to be honest with you. It's not like I'm sitting here dunking on Simeon because I thought he played super bad or something. If anything, I think he played pretty much exactly up to snuff from where I expected him to be. So at this stage, I'm kind of if I had a message to Bears fans, it would be hide your eyes because the next couple weeks could be hard to watch. They obviously, sure, they play the Packers, and sure, the Bears get the best version of Aaron Rodgers, I swear, every time they play the Packers. But after that, they play the Bills, they play the Eagles before they play the Lions and the Vikings. I think that the Bears are in a position to carry some really solid players into the future. I'm talking about Eddie Jackson. I'm talking about Tevin Jenkins. I'm talking about Dave Montgomery. I'm talking about Khalil Herbert. I'm talking about, yes, Darnell Mooney. Yes, Chase Claypool. I'm talking about Justin Fields. I'm talking about Eddie Jackson. I'm talking about maybe even Jack Sanborn. I'm talking about Kyler Gordon, Jaquan Brisker, even Kindle Vildor, and of course, Jalen Johnson. But everybody that I didn't name, that's like 3 offensive linemen. I think Braxton Jones probably wiggles in there. It's not that I'm trying to dunk on the poor kid too much. I mean, honestly, I'm very curious to see what Braxton would look like with a left guard that I think he trusted a little more, though it's not like Whitehair's been that bad, but left guard, center, right tackle could easily use an upgrade. Cole Kmet can easily come into the future. I think he's starting to come into his own, which frankly is fun to see. The problem is, to use an EJ Snyderism, the Bears house burned down in 2021. Envision a house, envision it burned down, right? The foundation's all you got left. Even if that, like, for the purpose of this metaphor, somehow the foundation got ruined too. So they had to reland the foundation. They had to build back up the bones, right? They had to add enough players to where technically you had a house. They finished the master bedroom. Maybe that's the quarterback. They finished the DB room. Maybe that's the, I don't know, the guest bedroom. Like, you pick something. Could be the kitchen, maybe one of the bathrooms. But the point is, they finished like 3 position groups and added just enough to the rest to keep the team afloat. And next year, the hope is that they finish out the house, and then we really have something that we can look at to judge this team off of. Look, I know there are plenty pointing and saying, just like I see in my chat right here, that I don't know if this Bears defense could even become average next year, but I would turn back and say I think that defensive problems compound themselves. When you have no pass rush, it makes your corners look worse. And when your corners get hurt, it makes bad corners look really bad when you have no pass rush. But you add a Will Anderson plus a Deron Payne plus a Hargraves plus another solid defensive tackle, because they sure have the money and draft picks to do that. You add a Tyree Wilson, you add you add pieces. You basically are going to remake this defensive line in free agency, and suddenly I think the DBs look that little bit better. And if the DBs take a step beyond that, like if Brisker just gets flat better, if Gordon really finds it, starts to build a little bit of like cornerback instincts to go with some pressure, you might really have a player on your hands. If you add like a Bobby Okereke at linebacker, I mean, for crying out loud, the ads that I just talked about was an inside linebacker, 2 defensive tackles, and yes, 2 edge rushers, of course. It's not like this is easy, but we're talking about 60 to 70 million dollars, which the Bears have and very well may invest, plus a really high draft pick. And so within that, I can't help but think that that's legitimately achievable. that the Bears could add, again, that's a first round draft pick and probably 3 to 5 contracts totaling somewhere in the 50 to $70 million range. And then suddenly the defense has a whole new look because you're able to stop the run with just 6 guys and you're able to rush the passer with the 4 guys that you have up front. It's not that you even have to do any of those well. You just have to do them better than one of the worst defensive lines in football, and the defense should take a step forward as a result. And then you switch over to offense. We said 60 or 50 to 70 million. That leaves 70 to 90 million to spend on offense, which, would you believe it? There are some solid centers in free agency. You can find yourself a guard, 2 guards, maybe. You could find yourself a second tight end. You could find yourself a number 3 wide receiver, depending on what you think Justin Fields really needs. And then there's more draft picks than just that first round pick. I mean, number 2 pick could easily become the number 5 pick, the 2024 first rounder, and the number, I don't know, probably like the number 38 or 40th pick in the draft. So suddenly you have 2 second rounders. You still have Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, Will Anderson. And on top of that, you've got a future first round pick to continue to load up your team with. Look, I get it. This thing's longer in the tooth than I think plenty of people want, just like other Robert. I know the feeling. I mean, for crying out loud, you are what your record says you are. At the end of the day, like Mike Ditka would say, is it on the left side or on the right side? Talking, of course, about the result. And is it in the win column or the loss column? And the Bears have lost a lot of games. And I think if everybody's eyes are telling them what my eyes are telling me, Bears may not win another. We'll see. I mean, maybe they beat the Lions. Maybe they beat the Week 18 Vikings. Or maybe Trevor Siemian injures his oblique conspicuously against the Vikings. Nathan Peterman goes out and loses to the Vikings B squad. I don't know. But I do think that the player infusion that we are about to see is going to be, dare I say, unprecedented. Let's not forget. You probably thought the same thing about how far away the 2017 Bears were. And then they got Allen Robinson. They got Taylor Gabriel. They added Anthony Miller. What did that really help? They added Roquan Smith. They added Price Callahan. They added, I don't think they added Adrian Amos. You get the idea. They traded for Khalil Mack. That was obviously a huge one. And voila, the 2018 roster was the best it has been in terms of production, certainly, that the Bears have seen in a decade, and it happened overnight. They went from a horrible 2017 team to a very good 2018 team. So all I will finish with here is, Bears fans, have a little bit of heart. We can do this. We're all in this together. It's frustrating watching the Bears look awful. But if anything, maybe it takes a little bit of mental heat off of Justin Fields and poor passing performances, because it shows us what I guess the other guy can do, right? And the answer is not much better, but definitely without the rushing piece. And so within that, I am excited to see what happens in the future. I do think the Bears are going in an unorthodox but exciting direction. That's the key. Maybe I'll truly finish with that, guys. That the Bears are going in a direction that has not quite been committed to this hard since Sashi Brown committed super duper hard to tanking with Hugh Jackson. And then Hugh Jackson came out in the second year and tanked again, that time on accident. So we haven't really seen an orchestrated tank, maybe since like Curtis Painter with Indianapolis. I'm sure there were more examples than that throughout history, but we certainly haven't seen a tank squad with a franchise quarterback in place. Normally, part of the way that they get that done is by adding a quarterback that is worse, like Curtis Painter, to use an example. This is really pretty unprecedented. And I understand all the frustration, but the hope would be that the Bears are right now the 2019 Chargers, but they have better injury luck in 2020 and 2021. I will say Matt Eberflus looks wonderfully aggressive. Look, he's not Baylor's Dave Aranda going for 4th and 1 on his own 20 in the first quarter, up 3 points, but he's going for 4th downs that feel like the game is on the line. And when you use those 4 downs to your advantage, you can prey on a lot of poor defensive thinking. He's going for 2 when they need to. Look, I'm not just trying to say, yeah, aggression, that's what makes the team good. But he doesn't look like your common core defensive head coach. He looks like somebody who understands modern football, as evidenced by the way he chuckled and laughed about the idea of spending a first round pick on an inside linebacker in Roquan Smith. So I completely hear anybody who says, I didn't think the defense was going to be this bad. I knew it was a bad year. I didn't think it'd be this bad. I completely hear anybody that says, "Ah, I just hate watching the Bears lose. But this is the hope is that we invest this, right? And the difference between these losses and last year's losses is that last year the Bears were spending money into the future just to keep a team together that went 6-11. This year, oh, and give their first round pick away to the Giants, who immediately turned it into Tavon Thibodeau, who's having himself a very solid year. The hope is that this Bears team, the losses beget them a Kayvon Thibodeau, right? That they get the value from these losses, and then Poles gets to, just like he said, take the North and never give it back because the Bears are building the right way. This is how you build through the draft. So I'm excited to see it, but just like anybody else, if I could sim the season right now, I would. Either way, Robert, I know I've kept you on the shelf for a little while. Anything you want to plug? Yeah, so we've obviously got our all 22 review that's going to be coming up, but we're probably not going to be talking about Trevor Siemian. Look, I get it. There may be some people out there that are really jonesing to talk about what happened with this Bears offense. We'll probably cover it very quickly. We may skip the defense altogether. It's just gotten sad. And we'll look instead at free agent additions. We'll look at draft prospects. We'll start really digging into what is it worth, right, to get through these losses, because I don't think dwelling on these losses is particularly meaningful. So you've got that to look forward to. That's at 8 p.m. on Tuesday night, plus anything else I have time for and whatever my baby will allow. Well, Robert, that sounds really exciting. So, of course, you can find that over on Second City Gridiron, where you can also watch this podcast be recorded live and talk a little bit afterwards on a live stream. But until next time, Bears fans, look, this one was rough. The Bears are 3-9, but I really do think they've got a bright future ahead of them. So keep your ears on the Windy City Gridiron podcasting channel. You'll have Bear and Balance coming at you tomorrow. Bears banter coming at you later this week. Bears over beers, obviously T formation conversation, and some wonderful, wonderful stuff that's going to be needed with Bare Bones with Mason West, who is going to give you all the deets that you need to hear on the IR situation, which will likely get pretty crowded this week. But until then, Bears fans, bear down. And thanks so much for bearing with me. Okay, that was a lot of talking. Thank you guys for putting up with that. I am surprised. When I used to record a solo show, it wasn't near that free. But so like I used to have to just cut and stop and cut and stop or restart and cut and restart and cut and restart and cut and restart. But that one, a couple of standard fare verbal mistakes aside, I actually rambled for 48 minutes. And I like to think it was kind of coherent, but I don't know. You guys tell me. Joe Calzano, I know you mentioned this earlier that the team right now looks incredibly like it looks really under talented. Uh, I know that right now that there are a lot of things about this team that look really really awful. But I can't help but think this is the same team that has been one. Yeah, I know, right, Kuzai? I can't believe Robert came on here and hogged the mic the entire time, right? But so the like I can't help but thinking this is the same team that was one end of game drive away from like one end of game drive away from beating Miami at home, right? This is the same team that was one end of game drive away from beating the Lions, the Falcons, the Giants, the Vikings. Like, I mean, they said it today. They said out of the 8 losses, 6 of them have been within one score. And I think that's core, right? They got blown out by the Packers. They got blown out today. And everything else has been that close. I mean, come on. Now that we're some distance away, can we look back on the Washington game and acknowledge how ridiculously close that one was? Like, the Bears had so many opportunities to capitalize. It is a little appalling that they didn't more often, at the very least. Like, within this, it's just, I don't know. Don't get me wrong. I really do get all the frustration. I really do. Like, for crying out loud, Akusai, like you mentioned, it's it is wild looking at, let's see, because okay, so thank you, Joe, for commenting, by the way. I'm going to immediately cut away from what I was saying and just get back to your question, right? You mentioned, I know, but most of his talent acquisitions that are supposed to be pieces when the Bears are good look not great. So I'll ask you really honestly, which ones do you mean? Do you mean Chase Claypool, who today had look, I know that there are plenty of people that do not care. Chase Claypool had 51 yards, which was almost a third of the Bears rushing or of the Bears total yards. He did so against a rookie, sure, but a good corner. Frankly, I'm hoping, right, that the Bears that Chase Claypool is getting valuable reps on the outside and kind of tuning up for what he needs to work on the or like in the offseason, but that's just hope. And so let's talk about what we're actually seeing, right? He won down the sidelines. The Bears hit him. That's fun. Jaquan Brisker looks like he's really starting to find himself. Still looks like a rookie out there. Blows the occasional coverage. What rookie safety doesn't? But he's coming up. He's playing as a hitter. He's competitive. He is starting to work at multiple positions within this defense. I think he's somebody to be excited about. The pieces, you've also got to remember, Joe, how many Bears pieces this year weren't supposed to be pieces at all. There's no way they drafted Braxton Jones and actually thought, that's it. That's our left tackle. But he's actually looked okay, right? Velus Jones, I completely agree with you. But it's worth remembering that we can make out all sorts of players to be okay. Okay, hang on. Let's see if I can get the dang screen share up. How do I do that? Let's just share screen. Let's just share screen. We'll share my second screen. Okay. So let's do this. Like let's look at it, right? Bears over the cap. Because everything that you're saying, Joe, I completely hear you. Let's just make sure we fact check it. Are you comfortable with that? I'm not trying to put you on blast. I'm actually trying to help excite you, right? Like to show you that I think that there is better than what you may be realizing. Because again, the fiscal investment in a lot of the players that you're mentioning is so low that it doesn't indicate the confidence that we may think it did. Like for instance, I'll turn on Epic Pen. So we have our silly little I don't know if this is actually gonna work, but we'll certainly try it. Let's see. So if I do that, oh sweet, I can draw on it after all. Neat. Um, let's see here. How far down do I have to go to get to your boy Lucas Patrick? He's got to be somewhere. Like Alex Leatherwood's making more money than him, apparently. Kademi St. Brown, Dante Pettis, Michael Schofield, Dominique Robinson. Have I just missed him? Is it because he's on IR? Because that would make a lot of sense. Let's see here. Tashawn Gibson. Why is he in? Oh, Tashawn Gibson. Let's see. Practice squad. Injured reserve. Okay. Lucas Patrick. There we go. Sorry about this. So check this out. For instance, John, like Lucas Patrick has a cap number of $2.5 million, right? Just like yeah, I could, Jacob. Sorry about that. But so Lucas Patrick's cap number, $2.5 million. Let's go ahead and just take a look at Cody Whitehair's, just to use a silly example. Cody Whitehair's cap number is $12.3 million. So 12, I know you know this. This is not to be pedantic. It's just because I think it does kind of matter, right? 12.3 divided by 2.5 is roughly 5 times more valuable, right? So while I understand that Bears fans and that pressers made it sound like Lucas Patrick was the guy, they did not pay him like they thought he was the guy. Money talks, right? And so within that, like you take a look at this, they had medium expectations for Justin Jones. Like that one, I hold. But Byron Pringle, $4 million. Al Qadim Muhammad, $3.5 million. Like they're paying Cairo Santos more than they're paying Lucas Patrick. And so within that, you take a look at some of this stuff, and it's like they didn't have any expectations from any of these guys that they signed. You could make a real argument that Alex Leatherwood is a bigger piece going into the future just based on how his money is structured than Lucas Patrick is, just because they are paying the money for him to be a bigger deal. Right. So Turu asks, are they gonna keep Patrick, or are they going to? I imagine you were intending to say let him go. I don't know. I think it'll depend, right? I think it'll depend on what things look like in the offseason. I think it'll depend on what things look like in the free agent market. I didn't think Lucas Patrick was a bad center. We saw him for a game, right? He was a much worse guard than he was center, that's for sure. But all the same, all we were ever hoping for was that he would go, or that we would go from Mustafa to not Mustafa, right? I don't know if anybody actually convinced themselves that they were a, what's the word? Like, that they were the dudes, right? That they were, or that he was going to be an all pro. But if they did, I can't help but think, look, I'm not going to name names, but we all know that there were a couple Twitter accounts that were just talking about how Equinemius St. Brown is going to have 600 yards. Elijah Hicks is going to be a future all pro, or at least a future starter, that Lucas Patrick is going to save this offensive line. Look, you guys know, I know, we all saw it. That's not what we did on this channel. If anything, I was obnoxiously quiet because I did not know how to talk about the fact that I thought this was going to be a bad year from Jump Street. Like, if you follow me a lot, you listen to podcasts probably where I talked about how I thought this was going to be a 5-12 team, and that was optimistic. Though, admittedly, I think that the ball probably should have, could have, would have bounced a couple ways to ultimately give them a 5-12 season. That would have actually made a lot of sense. But that said, like, the offseason's crazy about that. Like, it will be better. I get to do a better job this offseason because I like to talk about things that are worth talking about in the world of positivity. And the Bears are probably going to add some players that are worth getting excited about. It'll be a question of, are they going to be the guy, or are they going to be a pretty good guy? Instead of asking, is Equinemius Brown going to turn into a wide receiver 3? You know what I mean? And so I can't help but, like, J2K says, I know I'm a broken record with polls for agency signings, but none of them, yes, Turu it is, thankfully, but none of them give me confidence Polls will have success with all the money he'll have. J2K, I completely understand. Like, this is, you got to remember, this is like Polls' Marcus Wheaton year, right? Does anybody remember that horrible 2017 offseason? Like, Tracy Porter was the big addition. The very old Tracy Porter was the big addition on the secondary, and Marcus Wheaton was our superstar wide receiver addition, signed for, if memory serves, the high price tag of $6 million. Then immediately got hurt, and he was awful. And so, like, Kendall Wright was the wide receiver 1. Like, I get it. I'm more saying, J2K, if you ask me, and this is just my opinion, I can't vouch right now for Poles' talent eval. Right. What I can say is that I like Poles' process so far. We got to remember that what has been the hallmark, so to speak, of Ryan Poles' tenure in the late part of the draft. What he did was in the late part of the draft, Ryan Poles went with very high athleticism offensive linemen. It's not that all of them have turned into something, but for crying out loud, Zach Thomas just got signed to another team's roster. So apparently he's not that bad for a 6th-round pick. Braxton Jones is playing. The fact that one of those 4 is playing real snaps and doesn't look like the worst offensive lineman of the team is legitimately unusual for linemen picked that late in the draft. And from what I understand, the Bears kind of like what they have in Ja'Tyre Carter, but we'll have to see if that actually manifests to anything before I give him too many props for it. Like, because that's the thing, right, Chris, where you mentioned this should have been an 8-win team. I don't know if that's the case. Like, I want to agree with you, but I looked at the Bears defensive line and thought it was always going to be a major limiting factor. If anything, Chris, I can't help but think that if you put a normal quarterback, let's put Andy Dalton back on the Bears, right? Which I get that there are plenty of people that would look at that and say, well, that's not the team that I'm picking with. If Justin Fields is really the difference between you picking a 5-12 team and a 8-8 or an 8-9 team, I would ask, how much are you really trying to put on Justin Fields? Because right now, Trevor Siemian, certainly in the latter half of the game, I mean, I'd have to actually go back and look, but if I had to guess, Trevor Siemian went, like 90 yards spread across the final 3 quarters after the first quarter. It might have been less than that. Might have been closer to 50 yards. Like, I think he had 112 yards off the top of his head, or off the top of my head after the first quarter. And then that was it. And so within that, like, if that's what we're looking at, then we should only ask Fields to do so much. And I don't think it's a coaching problem. I really think this team is just quite bad. I mean, I'm the same guy who spent years saying this team is talented. The scheme is getting guys open. It's Trubisky's fault for years under like the Nagy years. And it's not to say that I'm harping on that. I don't actually know why I brought that up. I think I'm trying to say that I would tell you if I thought the team was more talented than it is. I'm trying to tell you that these wide receivers that aren't getting separation, like there's some piece of scheme that we can look at. Like I still think that the Bears could improve on man beaters, though it's not as if they trotted out Trevor Simeon and then ran a bunch of man beaters because they certainly faced man. And so I look at the Giants. So people brought up the Giants. You mean the same team that added Evan Neal, that added a like so yeah, it's the same team that added Evan Neal with the 7th overall pick. No, I think it was 5. Kayvon Thibodeau with number 7. They added Wan'Dale Robinson with their second pick. They basically ended up with quite a good offensive line, quite a good defensive line, quite a good defense in general, and then Dabble Magic sprinkled on top has made a really good team that can win a bunch of tight games, and good for them. They ran up against the Cowboys. They got buzzsawed, right? They scored 13. Like, same Dabble thing that we've loved. And that's not me trying to dunk on Daniel Jones, right? It's more to say that there are gives and takes. The football bounces your way sometimes it doesn't. It was the right year to lose, and they've lost. Chris, I do tend to agree with you that I thought the offensive line would be better earlier. And I completely agree with what you're talking about with like Justin Fields being really good. I just think that, let me put it this way, Chris. I think that when you're bad in the trenches, generally the football team is pretty bad and it's hard to avoid it. When you're not good in the trenches, it's hard to run the ball. When you're not good in the trenches, it's hard to pass the ball. When you're not good in the trenches, it's hard to stop the run. When you're not good in the trenches, it's hard to stop the pass. And so the Bears defensive line in particular was really bad, even when it had Quinn. Now it doesn't. When the Bears offensive line was always, let's be nice and say, underinvested. You had an underperforming offense. I can highlight him. You had an underperforming, oh boy, I don't know why I did that. There we go. You had an underperforming offensive lineman from the Pace era. You had a converted tackle that nobody really knew much about, right? You had Patrick down there at center, right? And then you had, let's see, you had a sophomore in Larry Borum, who's now been demoted, and you had a rookie in Braxton Jones, who's eating up a lot of snaps. That is as underinvested as you're going to get on offensive line. And the Bears have gotten what they paid for. Like, don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm trying to tell you, Chris, that I think you're wrong. I'm not trying to get in a fight. I'm more trying to point out that I think the Bears deliberately underspent on key positions required to win, and that's how they went about this tank, right? They didn't go about the tank because they spent a ton on, I don't know, like I don't know, they spent a ton on wide receivers, and whoopsie, now they lost because those wide receivers are bad. They they didn't get players that were, the simplest way I can put it is, they didn't add players that really moved the needle from we're bad to now we're better. And so they were bad to start. They still are bad. Justin Fields has given them the ability to just be better, right? Like Justin Fields has moved the needle. And so John mentioned this earlier. And John, I'm going back to something you said like 10 minutes ago. So I hope we're here for it. But John mentioned that there were plenty of people that didn't like how Ryan Poles handled the offseason surrounding Justin Fields. I was one of those voices, though I think I was one of the more lukewarm voices, like just trying to be as earnest as I can about it. I was not like, I love this Ryan Poles. At least I hope I wasn't. I was basically like, ooh, I don't know. This isn't how I would protect Justin Fields. But if you're going to tank, I get it. Like, at least you're going hard after the tank, right? Because the Bears had two choices, right? They could go the pace route. They could spend future money. They had future money, right? They could get Teron Armstead. They could get Larry Ogunjobi. They could get some of these other free agents that could have moved the needle, right? And they didn't. The other route was to suck, right? Because you didn't have that money. You could have if you wanted to, but you didn't, right? And so you would come up with the most normal looking team you could that would still lose games, that could still develop your quarterback, but wouldn't win, right? And admittedly, if you did build the offensive line, you probably are looking at more consistent scoring performances instead of these like absolutely flabbergastingly bad 2-minute drill situations that continue to improve draft position. I mean, like literally, guys, as much as I know it's so corny, like, okay, so NFL tankathon, like the flip side of getting frustrated with everything everybody's getting frustrated with is that if the Bears had one more win, they're down in this cloud. Like that's where they'd be. Look at that. Look at the difference, right? If the Bears had a single win more, they are now competing for between 7th and 13th, and that doesn't really matter, right? Like I'd love for that to matter. It doesn't really matter. And so I explicitly bring this up between because as bad as the bad bounces have been, the difference between 13th and number 2 on draft day is the difference between getting a massive amount of picks or not, right? And so as frustrating as I know this season is, because I know it is, right? I know that there are major pieces of this that go against everything you probably have ever been a fan of, right? Down to like all the way down to getting I don't know what is the word I'm thinking. Oh, we're selling our franchise quarterback out. How can we put up with this? How are we holding anybody accountable? Like all sorts of those questions that in a normal year you would need to ask. Absolutely. This year, let's go back to okay, so it's NFL positional spending. I said this in the middle of the podcast, but I want to just show it one more time, right? The Bears offense is the second least expensive offense in football, right? Steelers are obviously the least. We've talked about this for a little bit. Um, the Bears are also the second least expensive defense in football. And I said this in the podcast. We talked about this in the last stream, but for anybody who wasn't there, if you go through and you look at dead money, the Bears are spending more on their dead money defensive players than they are on their current defense. Like, it's a tank year, and they're tanking well. Like, say what you will about bad bounces, Velas, it's the right year to drop a punt. Like ISM, it's the right year to fumble at the wrong time. Like it is the right year for Justin Fields to give you a Deshaun Watson esque, Joe Burrow esque, like get set of games where you go, oh my gosh, he might really be it, and then whew, $1 million wound, like something that will heal, no structural damage in that left shoulder long term, and they get to confirm a couple losses. Like it's the wrong year. Like Chris said, I like this. I like this, Chris. I've embraced the tank because that's kind of where we are, right? I don't think anybody should have. Um, I don't think anybody should have come into this season saying I want to lose. That's not a great mentality, right? But now that we're here, let's embrace it because this, like, oh man, I did it again. Uh, this is what I get for going to StreamYard. Thanks, Jeff. This right here, unattainable. But okay, hang on. Let me use this. Look, okay, so the Jimmy Johnson chart's kind of outdated for anybody who's like really, 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 really into draft stuff. I get it. I understand that it's not the most like up to date thing possible, but for those who have never seen this before, this is something that real GMs actually use to determine draft value. And I want to just take a look right here, okay? 2600, okay? That's the point-based value of the second pick of the draft, right? The way this works is literal addition. If you were to combine the 500 or like if you're going to combine 500 to 510 to 520 to 530 to 540 to 550, you would have, doing some back of the napkin math, you would have 3150, right? And that means that those, what is that, six picks would be only just barely worth the value of the first pick overall, which is 3,000. Okay. So we follow the value of it, right? The Bears, by tanking, compared to 13th, not that far, right? have almost doubled the value. Look at that. So that's 2,600, no, over doubled, um, compared to 1150. So pretty high. And the reason that matters is because that means that if they were to trade from 2 to 5, okay? So that's 2,600 down to 1,700. So 2 to 5, right? 2,600. 5 is 1,700. Um, they like at that point, the idea would be to like that they would have to include, let's see, 5 would have 37, so that's 37, which would be 520 plus probably like a future second, F2, which would be like, let's see, usually those get valued at the mid round, so that'd be like 190. So far we're totaling 2320 plus 190 is like 2510. So then you'd probably have to throw in like either another future pick or an actual third or fourth to get this deal over the line. You're looking at a haul if that's not clear. Like you might even have to throw in a future one just to get polls to talk to you. And in that case, you're looking at a legitimate, like at that point, you would move back to 5. You'd pick up a second rounder, maybe a potential future first rounder, or even a future second rounder and a third rounder. Like you can start to see the value, right? Where at this point, you can see how just by losing a few extra games, you add a lot more youth and talent to this roster. And the best part is, so I think it was Joe. Joe, if you're still here, first of all, I appreciate you. Always good hanging out. Second of all, you mentioned Valus Jones. I'm glad you mentioned Valus Jones. Let's see. This is Arrowhead Pride Draft by position. It's an old article. This isn't perfect, right? But there we go. What the stats tell us about drafting positions by rounds. This is an old article published Feb 20th, 2015. So the data may not be exactly perfect, but it's a good starting point because I don't know anything in PFF that actually mentions this, right? I'm going to scroll literally all the way down so that you can see this. Here's the historic. So what they did a study where they looked for how often is a pick in a round at a position a starter, okay? Not a Pro Bowler, not an All Pro, a starter. That's it, a starter, right? And take a look at what they found, right? Where you can see round by round what the positional success rate is per position. And if you take a look at a third, like a third rounder at wide receiver, if you can see this, see if I can get it nice and close. Third rounder at receiver, 25% at finding a starter, right? In the first round, 58. In the second round, 49. In the third round, 25. In the fourth, 12. In the fifth, 16. In the sixth, 9. In the seventh, 5. This is finding a starter at wide receiver. Now, the main reason that I mentioned this is purely because, and I'll frankly, let me punch this into the chat because I think it's worth looking at if you ever want to look at it again. But so the main reason that I look at this is because Joe, you mentioned that you're just disappointed that Valus is the pick and that he didn't work out statistically. He wasn't likely to. And so it's not by any means that I'm trying to suggest that Valus Jones is the dude. I stand by my analysis. I think you could turn him into an MVS like receiver, but you need a healthy offense. right? And so I'm not going to stick to it too hard. I'm not the guy who's going to bang the table. I think that guys get misused or that they blow their chances and they lose trust. And most importantly, I'm evaluating what I saw on the field. I don't know how he is with the playbook. I don't know how he is in meetings. All of those things can ruin you. I stand to that. I think Anthony Miller could have been a real hell of a player. Clearly, off the field, that's not how he carried himself. And so, or maybe that is how he carried himself. That was the problem. But the point is that as good as on-film analysis is, I understand the coach's opinion trumps mine, and I'm okay with that. So I need everybody to know that that is sort of my bent. Like I'll tell you what I think of a player. I don't want you to hold my opinion over a coach, right? But so the whole reason I go on this rant, right, is so that you can exactly Haplo. First of all, yes, but the main reason I go on this rant is so that I can highlight that a third round wide receiver is not a given success at all. And so it's like, while I understand anybody who would say, you've got to be kidding me, like Valus Jones is the choice. It's also worth remembering that Jalen Tolbert, like Danny Gray, the other third rounders picked around him haven't exactly come online either. So it may just be a time thing. We'll have to see. But I mention all of this because, like you're saying, J2K, there are definitely other receivers that would have been more natural wide receivers. What I can understand that they were going for is who is a wide receiver that I can pick that will definitely be on this roster in 3 years, right? And playing a real role, like a role, J2K. I get the impression they drafted Valus Jones to be their change of pace wide receiver four. Like that they wanted him to be maybe the third option, maybe the alert option on some of these deeper concepts. I don't think they ever drafted him to be a wide receiver two or wide receiver three. Bears fans put him there, right? They said, well, I mean, you're going to have Mooney wide receiver one, you're going to have Pringle wide receiver two, duh. And then you'll have Valus and he'll be pretty solid, right? And so looking at that makes me think that that you just like that they didn't want a Tolbert or a Gray, that they thought, well, I don't know if we're going to keep him around. But like I do agree with you, Joe. Don't ultimately think of it as me stumping for the Valus Jones pick. It's more me mentioning that they looked like they tried to get something else other than what Bears fans thought that they did. And that's okay. It just means that it's what am I trying? Like, how am I trying to put this? If they tried to get a kick returner and they whiffed on it, I think it's a different whiff than if they thought they had a slot burner and then and then they whiffed. But I do think, like Chris is saying, that at least as a slot burner, he still has something that he still has some juice that I want to explore. He toasted his defensive back against the Cowboys, and he was one catch away from becoming like a hero in the eyes of plenty. But that's neither here nor there. Like J2K mentions with the O-line 40% success rate in the third round, that tears me up too because Abraham Lucas was a dude and I'm sad that the Bears didn't take him, which is just it's just me picking on something. He's doing great on the Seahawks now. Like that's a take that I pretty much never publicized anywhere, but I really liked his movement ability. Look at these offensive line success rates. Again, this is finding a starter, not that hard to find a starter. Braxton Jones is considered a starter. So Braxton Jones is the 16%, right? But within that, like I look at some of these guys and it's like, man, that's a pick that you can go with. Linebackers are started 70% of the time. That kind of makes you laugh just a little bit. You don't have to laugh too hard. It's it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here. And I want to do more research. Like I got to get back to family here at some point. But just looking at these like Bears receivers, looking at honestly the whole Bears situation right now, I can't emphasize enough. I get it. I get all of the frustration. But when you look at the cap, the Bears massively underinvested intentionally. This was the intended effort, right? Um, the let's see. No, I totally get you, J2K. Again, don't hear me as stumping for the pick. Hear me as let's be mad about the right thing, right? I feel like I do that on this channel a whole lot, where it's like I'm mad too, or like at the very least, I'm not absolutely all on board with something. I'm just not on board with it for a different reason, and I'm really not trying to be pedantic, and I'm really not trying to be oh my gosh, there's a word for it. Pretentious. But yeah. Um Turu, it's hard to tell. Like, is it bad coaching to not get him more involved in the game? It depends. Like, if this is Madden receiver and you could just drop him in and he knows the whole playbook automatically, then yeah, it's criminal. But it's not that easy. And so if Valus isn't missing his is missing his assignments, then Fields is having enough trouble. Fields is having to deal enough with getting Chase Claypool lined up. I can only imagine what it would be like to get everybody lined up, including Valus Jones. That's a lot to put on your young quarterback. And that's exactly right, Weedy. Frankly, I would tell you that I think that they built a team that was supposed to lose a lot more and not end up in some of these close games. Like, you look at this team, I think that the San Fran win basically took all of their good luck and funneled it into one game. And they've been paying for that win since, because that win did not belong. That San Fran team is built to beat this Bears team. That San Fran defense is built to beat this Bears offense up, and they did until they didn't. And so then they basically stole a win early in the year that threatened to completely torch all of their all their big plans in the offseason. And then it's good. I mean, since then, they have gotten right back on track. I don't want to show it again, but or I guess I do. Again, they are 3-9. They don't look like they may win another game, which is kind of exciting almost. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's going to be really interesting because, like Turu said, we would look at these games, we would be like, how have we lost so many close games? We blew the Patriots out in Foxborough. Like, I mean, you bring up a good one, Turu. It's not like the Bears have one win over a team that's worse than them based on records. That's the Texans, right? Every other team, every other game has, from a record perspective, been punching up, right? And so if they're punching up, then the fact that they've made so many of these games close is electric. I mean, this team, 29th in the order, down to the last possession. This team, 30th in the order, down to the last possession. This team, 27th in the order, sweated through the fourth quarter until they got some distance. This team, 26th in the order, sweated until that last possession where they dropped a punt. I get it. Nobody wants a moral victory. But I also think we can really look at this and say, for a team that is supposed to look up, I know, no kidding, right, John? For a team that is as poor as not Justin Fields, that was me reading a comment. For a team that is as poor as the record has been, Haplo, Dolphins pick is forfeited if memory serves because of the tanking allegations. The Ross stuff, the owner stuff, like him bribing Flores for to lose. But so at this point, I look at this Bears team, and from a roster, from a cap, from an actual results perspective, I see this season as nothing but a win. Now, let's go back and look at something else that's equally important. This. Let me highlight it one more time. This is never easy to watch. Never. I wish that somehow I could include. I should. Honestly, next podcast I probably will. I need something to talk about. This is hard. When you watch a quarterback throw for more than 10 yards per attempt, it is brutal. It is never fun, right? This Bears loss, hard to stomach. I don't want to take a darn thing away from anybody. We watch football to be fans, don't we? And so when you see your laundry get smoked, right? Noon game or not, away game or not, rainy game or not, when you go turn the TV on, you spend 3 hours so that you can watch in the final throes of this game, the Bears go from 10-7 in the first quarter to a slow, grindy 10-14, 10-17, 10-24, 10-31, milk the game out, miss a field goal. I get it. It makes you feel like the whole team just sucks and that they're really bad. They can't possibly be this close, right? But let's remember everything in perspective. It's all one data point, right? They've still got 2 wins that they should not have, right? They've got multiple results. Let me circle them all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 losses within 1 score, but let's take out the ones that are technically 1 score, but they weren't that close. Like, which ones were actually that close? Play at the goal line, like 3 points, 1 point, 3 points, 4 losses very recently in all cases that were that close, that close. And so I can't help but look at this team and I'm legitimately excited. I hope they hold on to the number 2 pick because if we're going to go through, here's my pull quote. If we're going to go through a season this bad, make it worth it. Like, if we're going to go through a season this rough, go all in, lose them, right? Like, I hate saying don't beat the Packers. Don't beat the Packers. Don't beat the Eagles. Don't beat the Bills. Find a way to lose. Don't beat the Vikings. Like, that's the thing, Turu. I'll tell you. So Turu mentions that he's worried, they're worried that that teams won't trade with us. At number 3, I don't know who will. At number 2, people will. CJ Stroud and or Bryce Young, like, that's where they're going to be. Like, that's QB 1 and 2. It depends on boards. I'm sure there are going to be some boards on some teams that are going to have CJ Stroud first. Then there are going to be some boards on some other teams that are going to have Bryce Young first. Totally. Right? This means that QB1, someone, right? QB1 and then QB2 are going to be right here, right? And at number 3, you take like I can't help but think at number 3, you're just taking the best defender. Like, that's where you get Anderson. Uh Turu, maybe they would want to trade up for Anderson, but I can't help thinking that at 2 in particular. Like, so J2K mentions it'll be tough. It'll be hard for him to watch us trade back and watch Anderson and Carter on other teams thinking, what if? J2K, I agree with you. Here's the beauty of the situation, right? You just listen to the offers. At number 2, you don't have to trade. I'm making the case for a trade, but that doesn't mean I won't be just as happy with Jalen Carter or Will Anderson. The beauty of it is you can tell them, make me an offer I can't say no to. And if they don't, just happy with the player you got, right? Like, that's a Myles Garrett piece. That's a Chris Young piece. That's an Aaron Donald piece. Like, you're that excited. I'm that excited. Like, that changes your whole defense. That changes your whole defense. But on the other hand, what if somebody offers you 2 first-round picks, like, not including the one you're going back for? 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick. Like, well, now we're talking. Like, I mean, okay. Like, I didn't realize that's the dance we're doing here. Like, okay, keep talking. You want to throw in a day 2 pick? Or no? How about an early day 3 pick? Like, how about a 4th rounder? Just to get this thing done. We'll upgrade a 6th to a 4th. How about that? Fine. Like, what if for the price of number 2, you can move back to number 6? I mean, okay, maybe Vegas wants to come up, right? That's not unsurprising. And so Vegas would want to come up. So they'll give you, all you got to do is fall back to number 4. And then you probably still get Carter or Anderson. Like, you probably still get Tyree Wilson. You probably still get, man, who's the one that I'm thinking of? Is Miles Murphy? I think it's Miles Murphy. Like, that's, to me, if you're gonna tank, this is how you tank. Like, you just embrace the suck. And you're bad. You're really bad. And I gotta remind you guys, like, I understand exactly where everybody's going for. Like, mentally speaking, I completely get the feeling that how on earth are we gonna get any better if we can't get or like if we're this bad. But it becomes okay, if the defensive line gets better, the DBs get better too. If the DBs get better and the defensive line gets better and the linebackers get better, the whole defense looks that little bit different. You got to remember. So, for those of you who don't hang out with us on Tuesdays, you got to remember that I'm a huge believer that what the Bears are playing defensively is not what they want to play. So, I do think it will literally look like people will say, Alan Williams' defense looks totally different this year. It won't. It won't. They'll just be playing cover two. They want to play cover two. Like they'll just be playing more of it. And they'll have the dudes to do that and not get punished for it, at least not nearly as badly. And to a lot of people, that'll look like a suffocating defense that stifles the run and forces you to play short passes and bend, don't break, and all that stuff. And that's great. But I don't think that they're running cover one and cover three because they want to right now. I think they're running it because they have to, and that they'll shift into more cover two, cover four, and stuff like that as they get the bodies for it. So the defensive scheme gets better. And then the offensive scheme, like let's get some talent. Let's add some talent to that. Turu mentions trading back again. One thing that I can't help but look at when I think about trading back is so let's say for instance, right, that the Bears go, and I know J2K, this may break your heart, that the Bears trade with Carolina. They go back to 7, right? Then they get a sweet offer from, I don't know, Jacksonville. They move back to 11, right? They accumulate a ton of picks. Let's just say it's worth it. Okay. Let's just say it's worth it at the time. The only thing this really costs you is that you don't get a sweet edge rusher. Okay. And then it becomes Q Johnston. Not bad. Ton of picks, sweet receiver, defensive problems, sure. But at that point, maybe you set up your future draft like for success forever. But you got the guys that can make your offense potentially pop. My point is to point out there's not really a lot of like flat out losing that I see if the Bears end up with the second overall pick. It's a sweet spot to be. They just have to lock it in. But anyways, guys, on Chris's blessing, I am going to. So I'll get this podcast up. Thanks so much for hanging out. Let me know what you thought of Rob on Rob. What worked, what didn't, and other things that can go within that. But so let's see, over under 25 new guys in the 53 next year, Myrtle. Oh gosh, that is a high number. I'm gonna take the over, but man, that's close. That is really, really close because they could turn a lot of dudes over and keep a bunch of these guys as other stuff. But so you're welcome, John. Hey, John, you're welcome too. But so either way, I will get this up ASAP. Talk to you guys soon. And until next time, bear down. Thanks for bearing with me, and I'll see you Tuesday. Bye.